All right, very good. Well, welcome, folks. Thank you for coming to our talk tonight. And again, as Riley mentioned, our again, overall we're looking at we have been looking at, and we will tonight too, various experiences of Christian spirituality. And tonight we will be focusing upon the idea of pilgrimages. Okay, good. So far in this series, that we've already explored two very particular experiences of Christian spirituality. One is relics. That was our first talk of the series, and then uh, building on that, then we looked at images, because if you remember from last time, that without the development of the cult of relics, and again, when I say cult, I'm not talking about, like, Moonies or anything. We're talking about the devotion to relics. The development of devotion to relics played a very important role in the uh, the development of images within Western Christianity in particular, because of the the Bible, the commandment against creating graven images, creating idols. Well, how do you have an image? How can you do that validly, uh, given that commandment? And the use of the combining of relics and images together kind of got around that problem, if you will. And eventually, people kind of got over it, you might say, and images took off on their own. And eventually there are no relics in images. But for a long time, that was the case. That every image also had a relic embedded in it, even if it was not visible or even a prominent part of the program of the image. And of course, we talked about, and we've used some of these things you're familiar with already. So if I want to experience then the reliquary image of Saint Faith, there she is up there. We talked about her the first time. Or the tomb of Saint Anthony of Padua in Padua, Italy. If you want to experience that firsthand, well, what does that require? Travel, right? So what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? How does that function in this overall understanding of the Christian experience? Okay, and that is tonight's topic. So let's review our understanding of Christian spirituality. And again, it's very important. We do this every time. And those of you who've been here before, please kind of bear with us, as it were. But it's really important that we know what we're talking about here, because everybody uses this term spirituality all the time. But if you ask people to define it, they'd have a hard time. So what is it, right? So it's concerned with religious experience. Well, what does that mean? Very simple. It's the experience of the transcendent. It's the experience of something greater than myself, right? Which we would call God, right? Okay. And that experience of that encounter with the transcendent, that encounter with God, whatever that might mean, however it happens, changes us, right? It's transformative, right? Towards some ultimate value, which for us as Christians, so far we've been talking about spirituality defined. Now we're going to say, well, what is Christian spirituality? Well, for us as Christians, it's towards the ultimate value of the triune God, that we see God as in the Trinity, right? Revealed by Christ through his life, the incarnation, his life, his ministry, his suffering, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, and such, right? So everything we know about God ultimately is seen through the lens of Jesus, right? And we participate in that by seeking to live in our own life the Paschal mystery, to realize the Paschal mystery in our own lives, right? And that's very human, right? Because We all suffer, we all die, we all hope to go to our reward. Okay. And we do that in the context of the church. We don't do this by ourselves, right? We do this in the context of the church, the people of God, or understood broadly as the body of Christ. There's a beautiful image from St. Paul, right? That we are the body of Christ, with Christ as the head and we the members, right? So that journey of returning to God is one that we do not undertake by ourselves, right? That we are united with one another in and through Christ. And we're able to do that through the gifts of the Holy Spirit, right? And again, these are all things you kind of learn, in religion class when you were a kid, or maybe in catechism later, right? But this is the Christian understanding of what spirituality is. So how does that experience happen, that religious experience of God? Well, it could happen through scripture, sacraments, the life of a saint. We've talked about that a lot already in these series, but also through creation, right? Beautiful sunrise, a beautiful sunset, the majesty of the ocean, the beauty of a mountain, a beautiful animal, right? Whatever it is, right? The beauty that we encounter in the created realm can be an experience of God, right? Because as Saint Bonaventure teaches us, everything that God made and makes, bears some footprint of God, right? That we see traces of God in the art of creation, okay? Or a relationship with another living person, right? So the sacrament of marriage is rooted in this understanding, isn't it? Through relics, through images, things we've already been talking about. And as we'll consider tonight, through travel. So our religious experiences, like with a saint, like St. Anthony of Padua, for example, can be transformative of our lives. That is, what does that mean, right? So let's make that explicit. How we view the world, okay? How we view other people, how we view ourselves, and how we view God, right? That through these experiences, through religious experience, how we view the world is changed. But it's not just about how we view the world, it's also how we live in the world, right? All right. So in order to experience a particular image, relic, we must travel, right? Now, you could just look at a copy, or you could look at the images that we've seen on the screens here, right? And that's fine, and that's got its place, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about here, right? That there is some value, some meaning to going to a sacred place, okay? And even if we live in the same town as the shrine we want to visit, right, it still demands some travel, right? You got to get out of your chair and go. It could be 1 block down the road, but you still got to leave your house, right? So the question then becomes, what is the meaning of the experience of travel understood this way? Okay. How can we come to religious experience? Again, understood as an experience of God through travel. Okay. So this is an ad for the Cunard Steamship Company from the 1950s. Cunard was one of the leading transatlantic passenger companies in the golden age of transatlantic travel. And here we see in this lovely image on a placid sea, a beautiful day on the Atlantic Ocean. In the background, the Queen Mary going one way. In the foreground, Queen Elizabeth traveling the other direction, passing somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, taking happy people across the Atlantic Ocean, right? And of course, they wanted you to get on their boats. So they had advertising campaigns, and their advertising slogan is very interesting. And it's getting there is half the fun, right? So that was kind of their promotional slogan, right? Because they knew that, okay, if you're an American, you want to go to Europe before the age of the jet, right? You are going to spend at least 5 days on the sea, on the ocean, right? And you have to promote that travel, that there's some value to that experience, right? Getting there to Europe is half the fun, right? And indeed, for most people, assuming the ocean was as calm as it is in this image, right? It was, right? There was lots to do. There was good food. There was, meeting new people, the adventure of traveling across the ocean, and all that business, right? There was a value to the experience of travel. Needless to say, that age has passed for most of us, at least for most travel that we do today. You can still travel across the Atlantic Ocean on an ocean liner. That's still available, but 99% of the traffic is going by the dreaded airplane, right? So here we are today, right? 70 years later or so, and we've got the indignity and the torture of waiting in line forever to go through security, and our flight's probably been canceled anyway. They never do that till you get to the other side of the security, right? So travel is it's just not fun anymore, right? That's a very subjective opinion, but I stand by it. Whereas back in the day, if you want to go across the United States, you could have spent 4 glorious days on a very comfortable train, right? But it did take 4 days, right? But the railroad companies here, you've got the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe's Super Chief, which was the most luxurious train America ever had back in the day. And you had a lovely 4-day experience of traveling across the United States and seeing all the beauty of our country. Or again, 5 days in a ship if you wanted to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Right? It's about the experience of travel that was seen as something that was good, something to enjoy as part of the adventure and not a torture. Again, needless to say, travel is not what it once was. It's a torture to be endured rather than a meaningful experience in and of itself. So already we've got a problem to get across, right? So this idea of considering travel as an experience worth reflecting upon, for most people today, that's probably not the case. In fact, in another way of interpreting the advertising slogan of the Cunard Company from the 1950s, right? Getting there is indeed half the fun today, right? In fact, it's not fun at all, right? It's like, hopefully I can survive 8 hours on this airplane and get off of it, and it lands on the wheels where I want to go. Again, another example of the lie of progress in the modern world, but that's again another subjective opinion. But coming back to travel then as religious experience, travel to sacred places has been a part of Christianity almost as long as there has been Christianity. And of course, that does not mean that these journeys were luxurious. Indeed, it was often the opposite. I mean, think back what it must have been like in late antiquity to travel from France to the Holy Land. That could not have been a pleasant experience, right? These were often difficult and even dangerous journeys. But the experience of travel was more than simply getting there. It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to get on the horse and 6 months from now, I'm going to get where I want to be, right? That there was some sense that there was a value to the travel in and of itself. And we'll talk about the meaning about that later. But first, we want to kind of talk through the history of it all. And in fact, travel to sacred places was seen as a spiritual practice. Right? And we call this travel pilgrimage, right? So a pilgrimage is not a vacation. I mean, it can be, right? But a pilgrimage is a particular kind of travel, isn't it? Right, where the travel in and of itself is meaningful, right? It's not just getting on the airplane to Rome or to Israel. And again, we use this term broadly, don't we? So, for example, we use this term to denote any travel to a place that is meaningful to the traveler, right? So one might travel to Stonehenge, right? And see it as more than seeing just another tourist trap, right? For whatever reason, this might be something really meaningful to you. And in fact, for me, it was. So that's why I use this as an example, right? Because here's where, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago, human beings created this monument. And it's like, well, what was that all about, right? This obviously meant something to these people, right? And traveling to Salisbury Plain to experience this firsthand is a meaningful experience. Again, it's more than just ticking off another box on the bucket list, right? Now, the next thing I'm going to, the next one is incredibly personal, right? So I got to tell you the story first, right? When I was a kid, the highlight of the year was the family vacation, right? And my father was kind of like this commando vacation guy, right? He planned out trips. He planned out trips well in advance. In fact, he probably planned 3 vacations for every one he took. And he just loved doing that, right? And it became kind of almost a military operation of logistics and planning and execution, right? And in fact, every vacation began probably around 4 o'clock in the morning because we wanted to beat the traffic, right? Because you're either going north or south most of the time, and you want to get away from the East Coast corridor traffic. So we would often leave early, and once the car needed to be refilled, we would stop, usually at Howard Johnson's. I'm sure some of you remember Howard Johnson's. Well, I had this kind of like fondness for Howard Johnson's, right? Well, believe it or not, there was, and unfortunately, this one's gone too. The last one, Lake George, New York. I had to go there. There we are at the Howard Johnson's in Lake George, New York. Sad to say, this one is closed now too. But this, as you can see on the sign, this was the last one. And as you can see from the parking lot, you can see why it's not there anymore, because there's nobody else was there. But it just goes to show you the simplest thing can have an incredible meaning to a person because it brings up all this other stuff, right? It's a reminder of happy times from the past and all those kinds of things, right? And hence, going to Howard Johnson's, the last one, is kind of a pilgrimage. It's a way of kind of understanding what this kind of travel means, right? It's more than just getting there and having a meal. All right. But tonight, our focus is on the experience of travel to sacred places. Now, I guess for some people, Howard Johnson's and Stonehenge could be such. In fact, I was at Stonehenge once I think it was the week after the summer solstice. And I'm not sure what they do now, but in those days, they let all the kind of like the pagan people come into the stone circle and do their rituals or whatever. And I was there one day when this was going on, and it was quite an interesting experience. There's still druids out there, or people, self-proclaimed druids who go out to Stonehenge and worship something. But for us as Christians, that might mean going to the tomb of a saint, as we've already talked about, or the location of a holy image, as we've already talked about. So, for example, here we've seen this last 2 times ago, I guess, the tomb of St. Anthony at Padua, right? A constant stream of people from all over the world coming because they want to touch the tomb of St. Anthony, right? And to do that, they had to get there, right? Or over here on the bottom right, the Black Madonna at the shrine of Jasna Góra in Czestochowa in Poland, right? Thousands and thousands of people come there every year to see this miraculous image of Our Lady, right? And to worship there and to have an experience of God, right? Now, again, pilgrimages began almost as soon as Christianity was liberated from the age of persecution. Indeed, the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity, now he not only legalized Christianity, he not only ended the age of persecution, but Christianity now becomes the state religion. It becomes the established church, if you will, right? Beginning in the year 313 with the famous Edict of Milan. And with that, Roman emperors went from being persecutors of the church to becoming patrons of the church. And indeed, Constantine built the first St. Peter's Basilica in Rome over the tomb of St. Peter, right, beginning in 320. So shortly after the liberation of Christianity, you might say. The amazing thing is, and there's been a lot of really interesting archaeological work done in very recent years, that it really is built on the tomb of St. Peter. I mean, there's really no doubt that directly under the main altar at St. Peter's Basilica is the tomb of St. Peter. Anyway, it was Constantine who built the first St. Peter's, which is not the one you see today. The original one stood for over 1,000 years before being pulled down to build the St. Peter's Basilica that we know today, that was built in the 16th century and which caused all kinds of mayhem in Western Christianity, topic for another day. Now, Constantine's mother, a pious woman whose name was Saint Helena, she wasn't Saint Helena when she was alive, but she is now, right? So she went on pilgrimage to the Holy Land between the years 326 and 328. And on that journey, according to the tradition, she discovered the true cross, that she was seeking out the place where Calvary was, right? And she found also the tomb of Jesus. And hidden away there in this locale was the cross of Jesus, according to the tradition. And she recovers that relic, right, which is still around today. Probably every church, Catholic church in the world, has a reliquary with a piece of the true cross in it, right? And she discovered these places that were associated with the Paschal mystery, right? And with that, this led to the construction, again by Constantine, of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is still there today and is the most important pilgrimage destination in all of Christianity, if you think about it. I mean, it probably doesn't get the numbers that other places do, like Rome or Lourdes or Fatima or places like that. But as far as importance, it's clearly the most important, right? Because it's the no Holy Sepulchre, none of this other stuff is meaningful at all, right? Now, after St. Helena, the most famous pilgrim from antiquity is a woman named Egeria. Now, this is a really fascinating thing, and it's not well known, and it's incredibly less known than it should be. So we have kind of a little image there of Egeria, who was a woman from either Spain or France. We don't really know exactly where she was from, but she was from Western Europe. And she made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the 380s. Okay, so that's pretty early. And the fact that she was a woman, right? Obviously, she was a person of means. She was able to afford it. She could do it, right? And she was also must have been a relatively well-educated woman, because she was able to create a travel log, well, what we might call really a text, right, about her pilgrimage in the form of a text, right, a writing, an extensive writing that she writes to her friends back home, interestingly enough, right? and that text is extant in part. Unfortunately, a lot of it's missing. But fortunately, the most important part is there, which is the part about her journey in the Holy Land itself. Right. And this text is available in English if you go to Amazon, right? If that's where you like to buy books, right? And you look up The Pilgrimage of Egeria. There is a relatively recent new translation in English. There's some older ones that are very good as well. And it's a fascinating reading, right? About this woman traveling to the Holy Land in the 4th century, very early, right? So, and on the right here, you see the map of, so we don't really know where she started. The map here kind of starts at Santiago de Compostela, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And her travels across the French and Italian Riviera, down through the Italian peninsula, then by sea through the Mediterranean to Constantinople, and then down through Syria, through the various important places in northern Israel associated with Jesus, Capernaum, Nazareth, down to Jericho, Jerusalem. Then she heads off to Alexandria, the great seat of learning in the ancient Near East, the famous library there in Alexandria, and then south through the desert. And you say, well, why did she do that, right? Because this was all the rage in the 4th century. This was the land of the desert fathers and mothers, right? This is where people are fleeing cities, going out into the wilderness, right? And establishing early monasticism. She travels around there and then back across the Sinai Peninsula, stopping at the great monastery of St. Catherine's on the Sinai Peninsula, near the place where it's believed the quote, Mount Sinai was located, right? And she gives an incredibly detailed account. Now, why I bring that up is, if you remember last time when we talked about images, that because of theological trends, Byzantine icons do not exist in the East. Old original Byzantine icons in the East are almost non-existent, right? Because of iconoclasm that happened throughout the first millennium. A lot of those early Byzantine icons were destroyed. And if you want to see a real Byzantine icon, you go to 2 places. Italy, of all places, because that iconoclasm problem never raised its head in Italy, really, or the monastery of St. Catherine's in the Sinai Desert, because it's incredibly remote. The iconoclasm forces never got there, and all these wonderful images from the Byzantine era were kept there and are still there. And it wasn't until the 1960s that art historians traveled there and said, oh my God, this is incredible treasure trove of early Christian iconography. And again, one of the places where Egeria traveled to, and then back again through Asia Minor, all those lands where St. Paul visited and establishes those churches, and then back home again. Her account of her pilgrimage is incredibly important. Number one, because of her description of the holy places as they were in the 4th century, very early, right? And perhaps more importantly, because her accounts of the life of early monasticism, we talked about how she traveled and visited with and talked to and interacted with these early desert fathers and mothers, right? These early monastic followers of Christianity, right? And her experience on the way, encountering that movement, as well as the liturgical life of the church in its earliest days, because it's different, right? I mean, it's different from what we would know today, right? And her account helps us to better understand what did the prayer life of the early church look like, because we travel with her. She tells us about her experiences of prayer as she travels along, right? All that to say, right, that this was indeed a pilgrimage for her. She's having all these spiritual experiences, if you will, on her journey. All right. And indeed, St. Helena and Egeria were the vanguard of a vast stream of pilgrimages to the Holy Land. However, with the rise of Islam in the 7th century and the occupation of Jerusalem by Islamic forces very shortly thereafter, travel to the holy sites eventually becomes increasingly problematic as tensions between Islam and Christianity grow, right? For the most part, the Islamic occupiers of the Holy Land were very tolerant of Christians. It was possible to visit these places well into the beginnings of the second millennium, right? But at the end of the 11th century, the tensions come to a head and the Christians are expelled from the Holy Land. And this then leads to a new kind of pilgrimage, okay? The armed pilgrimage, and that's what it's called, the armed pilgrimage of the Crusades, okay? Now, the first crusade was preached by Pope Urban II in 1095, so it begins at the end of the 11th century. And this one was successful, and it led to the establishment of the Christian Kingdom of Jerusalem that lasted until 1187, or almost around, up to the earliest childhood of St. Francis, right? Francis would have been like 5 or so years old when Jerusalem fell. And as we know from the life of Francis of Assisi, that he has an important role to play, in a sense, in the third I think it's the fifth crusade, and we talked about that already in a previous series. Those are still on YouTube. If you didn't catch it, help yourself. You can go back and hear all about Francis and the Sultan and all that business. Further crusades were mobilized over time with little success. The Christians were not very successful because, for one thing, they tended to be a little distracted by, well, the one crusade only made it as far as Constantinople, right? And they said, "Oh, there's a lot of good stuff here. Well, let's take all this and go home," and they did, right? So it wasn't a terribly noble experiment. In fact, if you've ever been to Venice, I think we talked about this before, but if you've ever been to Venice, the Basilica of St. Mark's in Venice is a treasure trove of stuff stolen by crusaders to Constantinople, including the body of St. Mark and those wonderful equestrian statues over the main entrance to St. Mark's Basilica in Venice today. So we're not interested so much in, kind of the dodgy side of crusading, but what we are interested in, though, is the spiritual practice of crusading. Now, that sounds strange to say, but that's what it was. It literally was viewed as an armed pilgrimage. Crusaders saw themselves as pilgrims, right? Because it was considered a penitential practice. We already talked about that, but just simply put, a penitential practice, it's not just about beating yourself up, right? But rather it's focused upon transformation, that through this experience, the participant in the pilgrimage will be changed, right? And the armed pilgrimage of the crusade was particularly focused as a way of conversion, right? Crusaders took vows. They had a certain amount of religious, spiritual preparation before they left, right? In fact, there are still, even though they don't function the way they did, there were what were called the military orders. So the Knights Templar, the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, all these, the Knights of St. John, I think there was another one. These were military orders. They were religious orders of people who went on these armed pilgrimages, right? And in fact, some of these groups still exist as honorary. It's like you give a lot of money to the Pope and you get to become a member of the Order of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, right? They're not out there, killing people for Jesus anymore, obviously, but you get the idea. Okay. All right. And it was seen as a way of taking up the way of the cross, literally, right? I mean, that's what it's about. We're going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And if we gotta, eliminate some people along the way, well, that's the price of the pilgrimage, you might say. But there was this spiritual understanding of what this was about, right? And a plenary indulgence, a full remittal of the punishments of one's sins was granted to crusaders, right? So again, this was very much seen as a spiritual practice. And here we have your typical crusader, and they literally took on the cross, right? Right. The uniform, if you will, of the crusader was the cross across the chest, right? A shield with a cross on it, right? Oftentimes the insides of the shields had images of Our Lady on them, right? Because it was a world of chivalry, right? It was that understanding of going to defend the honor of the fair lady. In this case, not the queen, not some princess, but the Blessed Mother. Okay. And hence you can see, I mean, the uniform of the crusader is a certain sense a religious habit, if you will, as strange as that might sound. So as we've seen already in our consideration of relics and images, pilgrimages within Europe became very important, right? Spiritually and economically, right? In the Middle Ages. It's in this time that we see the rise of such major pilgrimage destinations as Santiago de Compostela in Spain, right? The place where the relics of St. James are housed, and Canterbury, and we'll talk about that now. So here up in the upper right, left there rather, you've got a map of the various pilgrimage routes to Compostela. So Compostela is here, northwest Spain, right? And then the red line is the main route of the Camino, as it's called, right? This pilgrimage route across northern Spain. But it was connected then to a network, as you can see, of other pilgrimage routes, all leading to Compostela, right? And here to the bottom right is an image, a contemporary image of the church there at Compostela with its magnificent incense censer that flies. If you haven't seen this, go to YouTube and search for Compostela incense, and you'll see this incredibly amazing ritual of incensing the inside of the church during services at the shrine there. Okay. Now, over here on the path through France, there was another location, a stop, Conques. And we already talked about St. Faith, right? St. Faith's reliquary image, miraculous image, was on the pilgrimage route to Compostela, right? It was one of the stops. And all along that route were all these shrines where people would stop. So it wasn't just going to Spain, all along the route, there were pilgrimage stops to be made. Now, again, we should point out that pilgrimages were big business, for want of a better term, for the places that became pilgrimage destinations. So much so that, as we've already seen, relics of saints, like the relics of St. Faith, were stolen from their original shrines and translated to a new location that now became the beneficiary of the pilgrimage. So St. Faith was someplace else. Some monk went to that place, stole the relics of St. Faith, brought it back to Conch, and Conch then becomes a major pilgrimage site. And it was on, again, as we've already said, the route to Compostela. The next place we want to talk about is another town literally built on the economic advantage of being a pilgrimage destination. And that would be Canterbury, England, which was the location of the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. And we'll talk about him now. So here is on your right, here is Canterbury Cathedral today, still standing after over 1,000 years. And Canterbury Cathedral is it's the see of the Archbishop of Canterbury today, who is an Anglican archbishop, and the kind of the symbolic head really of the Anglican Communion. This is his cathedral, not in London, but in Canterbury, about 50 miles to the east. And indeed, there was, just as in Spain, there was the pilgrimage route to Compostela, the same thing in England. There were two main routes. One is not shown on here, from London to Canterbury, but also the one that we are seeing in the map there, from Winchester to Canterbury. Why Winchester? Again, tradition. Winchester was viewed by the tradition as the location of Camelot, right? This is where King Arthur and his knights, right, convened, right? And again, that whole chivalry thing, that interesting combination of culture and religion, right? And therefore, the main pilgrimage route to Canterbury began in Winchester, traveled along the south coast, along the South Downs, Sussex and Kent, and then up into Kent to Canterbury. And this route is a footpath that still exists. You can walk this way even today, and travel if you want. And people do, as a pilgrimage, people will walk from London to Canterbury, from Winchester to Canterbury, along the Pilgrim Way. Canterbury Cathedral became famous because it was the site of the martyrdom of Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, who, as you all know from the movie, came into conflict with Henry II, the Plantagenet King of England. Henry says unwisely, either on purpose or by mistake, will no one save me from this meddlesome monk or priest, right? And a number of Henry's knights say, well, we can score some points. So off they go. They travel to Canterbury, and there's Thomas Becket saying his prayers in Canterbury Cathedral, and the knights break down the door into the cathedral and kill Thomas Becket. Over here on the right side is the location of that chapel where Becket was praying. This is the place where he was martyred. Over here, you can see this very modernistic crucifix with the swords of the knights, reminding reminding the pilgrim who comes here of the sacrifice of Thomas Becket, who defended the church in the face of the meddling king in religion, you might say. Interesting thing about this place, the altar there is relatively new, as you can probably guess. And this was the place where Pope John Paul II visited Canterbury. He and the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, I think was Runcie, they prayed together here at the site of the martyrdom. And that's what it's called. This location in Canterbury Cathedral is called the martyrdom. Behind, at the very back of Canterbury Cathedral, the far end of the building, I guess it would be the The east end of the building was the location of the shrine of Thomas Becket. Here you see a recreation, a digital recreation of what that would have looked like. It was considered very likely as the most extravagant, richest, if you will, shrine in all of England and maybe in all of Europe. As we talked about previously, people oftentimes who go to shrines, let's say you go to a shrine and you're seeking out some miracle, right? And you pray to Thomas of Becket, and let's say you've got a bad leg, right? And you go to Canterbury, you walk to Canterbury, you say your prayers, and your leg gets better. It's very common for people who had that experience then to make some costly gift to the shrine. So if you look on here, the relic where the tomb of Thomas Becket would have been, you'll notice it's covered in jewels and things, right? Covered in those in jewels. And this is where people would come to seek out the intercession of Thomas Becket. Perhaps the most famous pilgrim who ever came to Canterbury Cathedral was King Henry II himself, and that's what's depicted here. You'll notice there's monks all around him. Cathedrals in England were monastic foundations primarily, right? But the archbishop had authority over the place. But the ministry was run by Benedictine monks. Here we see Henry II doing penance, coming to Canterbury Cathedral, and this is a historic fact. He traveled to a little village just north of Canterbury, a place called St. Dunstan's. There's an old medieval church there. When he got there, he changed into penitential garb and he walked barefoot into the gates of Canterbury. Went to Canterbury Cathedral and did penance there at the tomb of the martyred saint. The second most famous pilgrims to go to Canterbury are the folks from the Canterbury Tales, Geoffrey Chaucer's wonderful work. If you've never read it, it's not spiritual reading, okay? You're not going to get any. You're not going to have a religious experience reading the Canterbury Tales, but it's great stories, very entertaining, and it's the stories that these pilgrims tell as they're traveling to Canterbury. And here's kind of a medieval image of the pilgrims heading to Canterbury on their travels. Again, we talked about that Canterbury becomes then a huge religious center. Here up on the left side of the slide is a place called Eastbridge Hospital. Now, it's not a hospital as we understand the term. It was more of a hostel for pilgrims, right? If you were a pilgrim coming to Canterbury to go to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, here's a place where you could have stayed. And the building is still there. It's a very interesting place to visit. You can go in there and you can see all these vast halls that were dormitories, and you could see where pilgrims were served meals and things like that. And it's still there, still owned by Canterbury Cathedral, operated, run, administered recently, perhaps still, by Anglican Franciscan friars. And it's now a retirement home for pensioners. So a lot of older people live in the building now. It's kind of a continuation of a ministry itself. Behind Eastbridge Hospital is this interesting building here. This is the only remaining building from the Franciscan Friary in Canterbury, which was the first place in England where the friars established a presence. This building was actually a mill that the friars kind of borrowed, if you will, and became a residence for them. And eventually they built a huge friary on that same property, that's all gone, but this building still exists. It was used until somewhat recent, historically wise, as a prison, as a jail for the town of Canterbury, which I find kind of ironic that a friary became a jail. But we'll move on from that too. You probably might know that Henry VIII, the king in the 16th century, basically destroyed the Catholic Church as we know it in England, and including the shrines. So here is a real picture of Canterbury Cathedral, looking from where the shrine of St. Thomas Becket was. And it was there. Henry VIII had the temple, the shrine, totally destroyed, removed, and we can guess that all those jewels went to Henry, right? There was nothing left, including the body of Thomas Becket. It was, it's one of the great mysteries of whatever happened. There's a belief that the monks of Canterbury Cathedral probably removed the body, relocated it someplace else, and they didn't tell where it is. So there's this kind of constant search for the body of Thomas Becket. This candle you see is a rather poignant reminder of where the shrine was. That candle's always there, it's always lit, it's always burning, and it's a simple reminder of this is where the shrine was. A lovely touch by our Anglican brothers and sisters. And of course, our own shrine of St. Anthony here in Ellicott City is kind of, it's connected to that tradition, right? And indeed, people do come here. They come here on pilgrimage. They come to experience St. Anthony, just as the Egeria traveled to the Holy Land, as St. Helena traveled to the Holy Land, as the Canterbury pilgrims went to Thomas Becket. You know, people still come to pilgrimage places. In fact, the Camino, the pilgrimage to Compostela, is probably bigger, almost as big as it ever was. A lot of people do this, not necessarily even religious people, but people find that experience of focused travel as meaningful. And of course, that's the next thing we need to talk about. So we've considered the history of pilgrimages, but what about the meaning of pilgrimages? Now, certainly, there's nothing Christian about pilgrimage, right? The other religions of the book also have a strong tradition of pilgrimage, right? Our Jewish brothers and sisters continue to come to the western wall of the temple to pray in Jerusalem, right? Our Islamic brothers and sisters, you know, one of the tenets of Islam is once in your lifetime to make the Hajj, to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, right? So there's nothing Christian about this, which is interesting all by itself, right? That there is something inherently meaningful about spiritual travel. Now, as strange as it might seem, the quest to understand the meaning of pilgrimage is found in the worldview of the armed pilgrimage of the Crusader. Remember that the armed pilgrimage was seen as a penitential discipline and spiritual practice. It was seen as a means of conversion, a means of metanoia. The Crusader literally took up the cross, right? On their shield, on their uniform, right? And followed literally in the footsteps of Jesus. Right? Now, this might seem a stretch to the modern person, right? And that's understandable. But let us not fall into the error of judging the past based on contemporary tastes and values, right? Let's accept this for what it is and try to learn from it, right? This idea of following in the footsteps of Jesus to the places that were made holy by his presence. So, given that notion that pilgrimage is best seen as a penitential practice, let's do a close reading of the experience of pilgrimage then. So what's happening when you do this, right? First, a pilgrimage begins in the comfort of your home, right? It's got to begin someplace. It begins in your home, really, before you even leave, right? And in fact, one leaves the comfort of the status quo of life in your worldview. You in your home becomes then a symbol of who you are now, right? And your values, your worldview. right? The status quo. And then you take a step forward, moving beyond the comfort of the status quo, opening yourself up to an experience, right? Opening yourself up to a new experience. And one puts one step in front of the other, literally, right? Towards the destination, towards ultimate value, towards the transcendent, towards God, right? So you've got a destination. You're headed to Compostela, you're headed to Canterbury, you're headed to Rome, you're headed to Jerusalem. And this journey is one of conscious involvement. You're doing it, it's purposeful, it's mindful, as we would hear today, perhaps, right? It's no accidental journey, right? This is a willful movement of the body and spirit, where each step is meaningful. The pilgrim makes choices, which way to go, right? Some ways are chosen, some ways are rejected, but always focused on the destination, which is union with the transcendent. Now, isn't this what life is all about, right? This is what life is all about. The path taken is not the easiest way, necessarily, right? But it's the way towards the goal. Again, isn't that what life's about? Isn't this a metaphor for the spiritual life? Now, the destination of a pilgrimage is indeed some sacred place, a place made sacred by the history of the place, like the Holy Sepulchre, right? Or the relics of a saint, like the Shrine of St. Anthony, or some icon image, like the Black Madonna at Częstochowa in Poland. In each case, we come on a journey of transformation towards some experience of union with the transcendent through the journey, and finally arriving at the sacred place that we have longed to arrive at. And then, perhaps like the Magi, we return home by a different way, right? We're transformed by the experience of the pilgrimage. Our world is changed. The way we see God, the way we see others, the way we see ourselves is transformed. And our way of being in the world is transformed. The way we live and move and have our own being is transformed, right? And hopefully, like the Magi, we go home by a different way. Hence, the pilgrimage is best seen as a metaphor for spirituality, as we've defined it here. We seek to be changed, transformed by the spiritual journey of a pilgrimage, just as we seek our lives to be transformed by religious experience across the whole length and breadth of our lives. We never arrive, right? At least on this side of the beatific vision, but we're always on the way, right? And the way, the journey, is half the fun, right? As it were. Because we're always encountering God. We're always being changed. Well, now this doesn't have to happen, right? You can blow through life like a bull through a china shop and miss it all. Or one can be mindful. One can be present to each day, each moment of the day, and especially focused during a fixed pilgrimage experience. Now, indeed, some pilgrimages are literally once in a lifetime events. They are significant, life-changing experiences of spiritual transformation. But can we not bring this same perspective to less extravagant journeys? Like a journey to a local shrine or place of pilgrimage, like those who come here to the Shrine of St. Anthony, especially on Tuesdays when we have our 13 Tuesdays devotions. Yesterday, this past week, I met a woman here. Her and her husband live in Virginia. They travel an hour and a half each way every Tuesday to come here, to be a part of, to come to St. Anthony and to be a part of those 13 Tuesdays devotions, to come to Mass, come to confession if they want, right? That's their weekly pilgrimage. It's a spiritual experience. It's a religious experience for them, and very important, you know. And again, they're only, it's not like they're going to Rome, right? They're coming here. But for them, it's a powerful thing, very meaningful. Or even the visiting the grave of a saint we have known in this life. Could be your mother, right? Could be your grandmother, right? Your grandfather, a friend you had, maybe some mentor, spiritual mentor who's gone before us, right? Visiting their grave can be a pilgrimage. It's a meaningful experience. Or even a pilgrimage taken to the micro level, as you might say. So, for example, there's been a recent interest in, and this is not a new thing, this is a retrieval of an ancient practice of labyrinths, right? Here you see the labyrinth, the famous labyrinth from the medieval cathedral at Chartres in France, right? This beautiful labyrinth, and as you can see, people walking it. If you've never done this and you get a chance, I encourage you to do it. It's because it's a mini little pilgrimage, right? And if you're it's very prayerful, right? As you're just walking through this kind of maze thing, right? And you're turning here, you're turning there, you're making U-turns, right? And eventually you get where? To the center. Right? Very meaningful experience. But you don't have to go to Chartres to do that. There's labyrinths everywhere these days. Excuse me. And they're all over the place, and people can come and visit, a labyrinth and to have that mini micro pilgrimage, if you will. So hence, we've come now to a worthy conclusion to these reflections on experiences of Christian spirituality. We've seen how a retrieval of the cult of relics can be the locus of a meaningful religious experience. We've seen how relics allowed a theologically acceptable retrieval of images in Western Christianity. And tonight, we've seen how even the journey to a sacred space that has historical religious meaning, or a sacred image, or the relic shrine of a saint, contributes to the transformation of Christian spirituality. Even when we experience in very simple ways, right? So I'd like to end this tonight with the prayer that we've been using. And again, as I mentioned, this is it's called a Pilgrim's Prayer, and this is a prayer used in the liturgy at Santiago de Compostela, as a prayer for the pilgrims who come there on the Camino. So let's I will say it out loud, and if you'd like to join me in your heart and mind there, we can pray together this Pilgrim's Prayer, because indeed, aren't we all pilgrims, right? Every day of our life is a pilgrimage. O God, you brought your servant Abraham out of the land of the Chaldeans, protecting him in his wanderings across the desert. We ask that you watch over us, your servants, as we walk in the love of your name on our pilgrimage of life. Be for us our companion on the walk, our guide at the crossroads, our breath in our weariness, our protection in danger, our home on the road, our shade in the heat, our light in the darkness, our consolation in our discouragement, and our strength in our intentions. So that with your guidance, we may arrive safe and sound at the end of the road, and enriched with grace and virtue, we return safely to our homes filled with joy. In the name of Jesus Christ our Lord, amen. St. James, pray for us. Mary, Mother of Pilgrims, pray for us. Amen. All right. So that's the end of our talk here tonight. I'm going to send it back to Riley, see if we have any questions. And if we do, we can address those. And if not, we will adjourn. But thank you for coming tonight. And thank you for being a part of this series of talks. And back to you, Riley.
All right, so thank you everyone for coming. So there's one question. This is a really interesting question. Is so going back to the Crusades. We know that Francis went on the crusade, right?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. You could say that. Yeah.
Could
you
question? Could you say that that we know that the habit for the Franciscans is in the form of a cross? Could you say he got it a little bit of an idea from the Crusades with that they had the cross on their uniform?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know. One is dependent upon another, but I think it's probably best maybe to see that this as the spirit of the age, right? Because in a certain sense, what the Crusader, so again, Francis gets caught up, if you will, into the crusade. It's 1219-ish. And he ends up going, the Crusaders are heading to Egypt because, it's if you want to get to that's where the Sultan was, his army was, and that's where, if you want to get to Jerusalem, you got to first get past the Sultan's army, right? So, and they were encamped in northern Egypt at Damietta. The Crusaders were already there, and Francis hears about this, right? And he goes and joins. And again, this is something that's, in my opinion, a really abused scene from the life of Francis of Assisi. Why does he go? He knows that the only way to keep this from becoming. He obviously was not a supporter of the crusade as a battle, as the war, right? I mean, he was not going there to be the chaplain, as it were, to the Crusaders, right? He was going there to hopefully not have that happen, that the crusade would not break into war. How was he going to do that? By preaching to the Sultan, by seeking the conversion of the Sultan. And how does he do that? Primarily through living his Christian life, right? Living the Christian life in the presence of the Sultan, and hopefully inspiring the Sultan to embrace Christianity. Now, that was a failure; it didn't work. All that to say, right, that Francis, the design of the poor clothes worn by the friars was very much rooted in that notion that it is in the sign of the cross. Right. And in fact, the sign of the Tau cross, a little different, right? The Tau cross is the T in the Greek alphabet. It's like a cross without the top part, you might say. It looks like a T, right? Which comes out of the Bible, right? It comes in Ezekiel and it comes in the book of Revelation, that those marked with the Tau would be saved, right? So Francis embraces that image of the cross as his symbol for coming, the journey to salvation, right? And in fact, he uses the Tau cross, at least in one occasion, as his signature, right? So again, very important image, right? But the same was true for the Crusaders, right? They are traveling under the sign of the cross, right? They are walking the way of the cross. Now, certainly their means of accomplishing their goals were different. But what we can say, though, is that this understanding of the way of the cross, right, as as the spirit of the age,
Hmm.
right? Because what are the Crusaders trying to do? They're trying to liberate Jerusalem. They're trying to liberate the place where Jesus walked the way of the cross, right? What if Francis? Now, Francis, interesting thing about Francis, Francis does not convert the Sultan, but the Sultan is at least impressed enough to give him and his companions kind of like a pass to go travel. And Francis does end up wandering around the Holy Land. And in fact, even to this day, the Roman Catholic presence, primary presence in the Holy Land is in the Franciscan friars, the Brown Friars. Okay, they are the main custodians of the Roman Catholic shrines in the Holy Land, and then Francis, and then what comes out of that then is the devotion to the Stations of the Cross, right? That comes out of the Franciscan playbook, if you will. Franciscans take that idea and bring it back to Europe and start setting up Stations of the Cross in churches and places so that people can do this pilgrimage of the way of the cross without traveling all the way to Jerusalem. Right. So again, I've wandered way off the question, but I don't know. I don't think it's right to say that Francis was inspired by the Crusaders adopting the symbol of the cross. I just think it was probably best, again, it's best viewed as the spirit of the age, and that Crusaders and Francis could both embrace the cross, very different ways of understanding this, different ways of living it, but they're both inspired by that same image, I think. Again, the power of images.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's my best shot.
I think that totally does. Totally. Another question is how do we, so like whenever we go on a pilgrimage or like go to any shrine, like sometimes we get the we worry too much about getting to our destination with like traffic and
Yeah.
plane tickets and everything, and then we get there and we end up like worried about what we're gonna buy to bring back. How do we cultivate the like the spirit of actually enjoying and getting something out of
Yeah. Yeah.
the pilgrimage?
Yeah. Well, again, that's a good question because again, because we're most pilgrimages today, well, like the big, like, let's say you're going to Rome or you're going to the Holy Land, right? Well, you're probably going to get on an airplane. So 99% of the travel is done, within 8-10 hours, whatever it is, right? So, but then once you get there, hopefully, you can at least adopt kind of a spirit of pilgrimage rather than just see it as, okay, I need to go to the Holy Sepulchre, I need to go to Bethlehem, and you're ticking off boxes, and I need to stop at all these places and buy stuff, tchotchke, to take home, right? There's a group called Franciscan Pilgrimages that do an incredibly good job of that at Franciscan places, and they offer pilgrimages if you're kind of interested in that. I mean, they do a really fine job. I mean, they lead folks around through, you might say, Franciscan holy sites, always rooted in the spiritual meaning of that place or that moment in the life of Francis or whoever it is, right? So, but yeah, it's a commitment that you have to make, right? You've got to tell yourself before you even go that I'm not going on vacation, right? This is a spiritual journey, and you're kind of got to be accountable to yourself, and and that it is possible, right? But to always see it that way, that I'm not just going there to see the sights, but to really to try to where is God in this place, right? How can I experience God's presence in Rome, the Holy Land, Lourdes, the Shrine of St. Anthony, whatever it might be?
And maybe the real task is to figure out how do we make the pilgrimage out of going to work or going to
Uh,
grocery store or just driving in the car.
yeah, that's true. I mean, again, it's that whole notion of, again, this is all the rage, and it's not a Christian term, that mindfulness business, right? I mean, there is something to that, right? That are we aware of who we are and what we're doing, right? It's so easy, like I said, to blow through life like a bull through a china shop, right? And as we've, but getting there should be half the fun, right? That every moment is an opportunity for encountering God, even on the highway, or
All
even
right.
worse, when an airplane.
Or on a boat.
That's okay. Or a train. Trains are good. Trains are good. Boats are good.
All right. So if anyone doesn't have I'll open the floor now. If anyone has any other questions, just unmute yourself and you may go right ahead. Or comments too. And now if not, let's end in prayer.
Riley, I have one.
Go ahead, Ray. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, just for the everything Father Stephen said just resonated very nicely with me. It's a great blessing that I happen to be the tour guide at the Shrine of St. Anthony. It's a great blessing for me. I mean, it's not whether you have to talk to the pilgrims, whether it's a blessing for them or not, but all of the things that he said about experiencing a place, I have given that tour a very large number of times, and each time it is different, and it is like experiencing it again. And so while the plane travel might be there and whatever, whenever you get to wherever you're going, truly experience that place, because it is changing. And for those of you who do come to the Shrine of St. Anthony every once in a while, if you haven't, you probably haven't visited the new St. Anthony Garden of Eternity that is located behind the Stations of the Cross. It is almost done, but all of the reflection stations, the meditation places, are now complete. It is quite a wonderful place to visit. I'm sure it's going to be dramatic as you go through the various seasons to see it at different times. So if you're in the area, I'd encourage you to visit it.
Yeah, I was can I say something about that. First off, just want to offer a word of thanks. I mean, Ray does an incredible ministry here of offering the tours to the pilgrims who come here, and he does a great job, and we're grateful for his ministry, and it's really important. What his ministry is very important. I was going to mention the garden. It's not quite finished. It's kind of finished, but we're in kind of like the dormant season right now. But there is, I talk about the labyrinth understanding. We've thanks to a benefactor who has given a huge gift to the friary here to build this garden of St. Anthony over the first ridge there, heading towards the woods. It's really amazing. It's a beautiful place, and again, it's a path that wanders through a garden, 13 stations of virtues, if you will, of St. Anthony. And you could stop at each one, and there's a bench, and if you want to reflect a little bit, again, it's good. It's a good example of this micro pilgrimage thing that I was talking about. And it's just another reason to come to visit us. I wouldn't come just quite yet. The winters, but I think once spring comes and it's planted again, and for the spring, it will be really a powerful experience. So yeah, thanks for reminding me of that, Ray. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And just off of Father Stephen too, if you have been impacted by these talks in any such way too, you can go on to our website, and there's a link in the email that you did get to give a donation if you feel called to do that, to support us and to support what we do here. And these talks are not put on without your support at all. So whatever you can give, please give. And once again, thank you, Father Stephen. And let's end in a prayer as we go off on our own pilgrimages.
And Lord, we thank you for this time together this evening. We ask you to continue to walk with us on our journey through life, continue to bless us on our way, help us to always be open to your presence each moment of our lives, and lead us safely home to you. And we make this prayer through Christ.